Now we have a pattern. This pattern will be seen now as we come through the Slavonic versions, the Romanian versions, the Bulgarian versions, the Danish versions, the Japanese versions, the German versions, and the Hindu and Hindustani versions. We're going to see from now on our study of manuscript evidence and biblical introduction that there's a constant rotating back and forth between two different kinds of Bibles. One comes out and is revised to bring it back to Alexandria, Egypt. It is brought back in line with the truth, the Word of God. It is revised to bring it back in line with Alexandria, Egypt. It is brought back to the Word of God. It is revised to bring it back to Alexandria, Egypt. This phenomena will now be found in the Spanish Bibles, the French Bibles, the Italian Bibles, the Slavonic Bibles, the Japanese Bibles, and the Bibles translated in India. And of course, it is so apparent in the translation of English Bibles that it doesn't need comment. We now come to the Old Latin versions, the translation of the Greek New Testament into Latin. The Old Latin is quoted by Cyprian in 250, which means there's an Old Latin Bible that was translated at least 100 years before Vaticanus and Sinaiticus were written. Therefore, when these apostate fundamentalists say the oldest manuscripts, we're not to take them really too seriously. After all, the church fathers are quoting passages many times that don't match the oldest manuscripts, and they're quoting versions that were in circulation 100 years before the oldest manuscripts were written. For example, Tertullian quotes an Old Latin version, and Tertullian quotes it in 190 A.D. Now, there are three types of Old Latin versions, carefully sorted out to omit any from Syria. That is, the scholars, in their effort to get rid of the Syrian text, sort out three different Latin versions without telling you the right one. The Old Testament from 150 A.D. contains the Apocrypha, since the Old Testament Old Latin in 150 was an African translation of Origen's so-called Septuagint. They were added to Latin originals. In plain words, along about 150, now they ran it back there to try to justify the edition of the Apocrypha back to 150, and when they did that, they made a horrible mistake, because if they ran that thing back to 150, then they've got a New Testament in 150. And this means that, you see, they were so anxious to get that Apocrypha in, you see. They got that thing back to 150 A.D. because they found signs of the Apocrypha in the Old Latin. So they put that thing back to 150 A.D. to try to prove that the original Septuagint had the Apocrypha in it, you see. Once they did that, they sure got themselves in a ringer, because they had to get a New Testament back to 150, and if that's where it was, it means that there are 46 manuscripts of Old Latin that come from a Latin text 200 years older than Vaticanus or Sinaiticus. These Latin manuscripts contain 1 John chapter 5, verse 7, and the ending on Revelation 22, which Erasmus copied out of the Vulgate. But you'd never hear that in a class at a Christian university or a Christian college, because they're not interested in discussing the sources of apostasy. And the apostate fundamentalists that omitted 1 John 5, 7, and the apostate fundamentalists that told you that the ending in Revelation 22 was copied out of the Vulgate, found in no Greek manuscript, lied to you like a dog. They forgot to tell you that the Old Latin went back 200 years before any Greek manuscripts they had. They also forgot to tell you that when the Greek manuscripts were discovered, they matched the Old Latin in 85% of the passage. And that information is documented by the Trinitarian Bible Society of London, England, and anybody can get the material, and anybody can check it. Now, whoever wrote the Apocrypha, not the Septuagint, Whoever wrote the Apocrypha wrote it many, many years after the Old Testament was complete. And whoever wrote the Apocrypha stuck it into the Old Latin after 150 A.D. The New Testament in 150 A.D. in the Old Latin means that the Old Latin may be even older than the Syriac. And this means, are you listening? This means many times when we take a reading like Acts 9, 5-6, or Acts 8:37 from the Old Latin, some of which Jerome retained in the Vulgate, we are using readings that are 200 years closer to the originals than the Greek manuscripts recommended by Tennessee Temple and Bob Jones University. Now, that is worth knowing when talking about the Bible. Because no Bible recommended by Bob Jones of Tennessee Temple except the King James has those verses in them. And like our brother said in 1904 at the Trinitarian Bible Society in London, quote, if there's no such thing as the Bible, then a Bible or any Bible will do.